What would you do if you were rejected, humiliated, and thrown out of your own company? One man decided to find out just how much his legacy had changed by walking through the front door dressed in worn clothes with a simple job application in hand. What he discovered would break his heart and change hundreds of lives forever. In a world where worth is measured by appearances, where invisible hands keep our spaces clean while remaining unseen themselves, a powerful CEO and a struggling single mother share a secret that could destroy careers and reshape destinies. As their paths cross again after 9 years of silence, buried truths rise to the surface, forcing everyone to question what truly matters, the titles we hold or the humanity we choose to honor in others. Follow this heart-wrenching journey of recognition, redemption, and the courage to face the consequences of our choices, a story that will make you look twice at every person you pass in the hallway, wondering what hidden strengths they might possess, what invisible burdens they might carry. Follow our channel for more stories that will change how you see the world around you. Like, comment, and share where you're watching from. The glass doors of Whitaker Logistics parted with a hushed whisper, allowing a gust of autumn chill to sweep across the polished marble floor of the reception area. Kelly Hansen nearly spilled her caramel macchiato as her eyes locked on the disheveled figure hovering at the entrance. For a moment, she considered pressing the security button hidden beneath her desk, something she'd never done in her 3 years working there. The man standing before her was a stark contrast to the usual parade of pressed suits and polished shoes that streamed through these doors. His faded jeans hung loose around his waist, stained with what looked like motor oil at the knees. A threadbare flannel shirt peeked out from beneath a wrinkled navy jacket that had seen better days. But it was the blue baseball cap, worn to the point where its original team logo had nearly vanished, that seemed to complete the picture of destitution. "Can I help you?" Kelly's voice cracked slightly as she watched him approach, clutching a manila envelope to his chest like it contained his most precious possessions. The waiting area fell silent. The usual ambient noise of keyboard clicks and whispered conversations evaporated as all eyes turned toward the intruder. A young executive pulled her designer bag closer to her chest. 2 men in tailored suits shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances loaded with judgment. The man, Thomas Whitaker, though nobody recognized him, approached the desk with slow, deliberate steps. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the envelope on the counter. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his salt and pepper beard was patchy and unkempt, yet there was something in those eyes, a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his appearance. "I have an appointment," he said softly, his voice surprisingly refined, "for the administrative assistant position in logistics." Kelly glanced down at her computer screen, scrolling through the day's interviews. "Your name, sir?" Thomas White," he replied after a brief hesitation, using the simplified version of his name he'd prepared for this moment. Before Kelly could respond, Craig Donovan emerged from the hallway, coffee in hand, his meticulously styled hair and custom-tailored suit a study in corporate success. As the operations manager, Craig had built a reputation for ruthless efficiency and uncompromising standards, qualities that had earned him 3 promotions in just 4 years. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Thomas. "Is there a problem here, Kelly?" "This gentleman says he has an interview for the logistics position," she replied, voice lowered but not enough to prevent Thomas from hearing. Craig's expression shifted from annoyance to disgust. He didn't even attempt to mask his disdain as he looked Thomas up and down. "There must be some mistake," he said, loud enough for everyone in the reception area to hear. Thomas pulled a folded application from his pocket and smoothed it against the counter. Under "Position Sought," the words "Administrative Assistant Logistics Department" were neatly printed in blue ink. Craig barely glanced at the paper before snatching it up. "Listen, buddy," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't know how you got past security, but this is a Fortune 500 company, not a soup kitchen." A collective murmur of uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the waiting area. Thomas remained silent, his eyes fixed on Craig's face. "This isn't the place for you," Craig continued, tearing the application in half with deliberate slowness. "The social services office is 2 blocks down. They might be able to help you there." The torn pieces fluttered to the counter like wounded butterflies. Thomas made no move to retrieve them. "Sir," Kelly interjected, her professionalism battling with her desire to avoid conflict. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Craig cut her off. "We have standards here. Our clients expect a certain level of Quality. He turned back to Thomas. You don't fit that description. Now please leave before I call security. From the far corner of the reception area, a young woman paused in her work. Maria Dawes, dressed in the grey uniform of the cleaning staff, pressed her mop against the floor with white-knuckled intensity. Her dark eyes met Thomas's for the briefest moment. A flash of recognition, not of his face, but of the humiliation etched across it. She had worn that same expression too many times herself. Thomas stood motionless, his weathered hands resting on the envelope he'd placed on the counter. The silence stretched uncomfortably until finally he spoke. I understand, he said quietly. His voice carried no anger, only a profound sadness that seemed to fill the room. Thank you for your time. He left the envelope on the counter, turned, and walked toward the exit with unexpected dignity. Through the glass doors the sky had darkened, and rain had begun to fall in a fine mist that clung to everything it touched. Forget your trash, Craig called after him, gesturing to the envelope. Thomas paused at the threshold, looked back once, not at Craig, but at Maria, still clutching her mop in the corner, and then stepped out into the rain. Craig shook his head, muttering something about security protocols as he strode back toward his office, already dismissing the encounter from his mind. Kelly reached for the abandoned envelope, curiosity overcoming her initial revulsion. Inside was a complete application package, references, certifications, even an old employee ID from some previous job. But attached to the back was something else, a yellowed form labeled Special Request Form 17, with handwritten notes she couldn't quite make out. As she tucked the envelope into her drawer, intending to dispose of it later, she didn't notice Maria watching from across the room, didn't see the silent tears tracking down the cleaning woman's face, and certainly couldn't have known the significance of what had just transpired. Outside, Thomas Whitaker, the founder and CEO of the very company that had just rejected him, walked slowly through the rain, his blue cap pulled low over his eyes. 3 years ago, he had disappeared from public life without explanation, his whereabouts becoming one of the business world's most enduring mysteries. Tomorrow, his identity would be splashed across every financial newspaper in the country. Missing CEO returns, disguised as homeless man, only to be rejected by his own company. But tonight, as the rain soaked through his clothes and the lights of the towering Whitaker building faded behind him, he was just a man in a blue cap, carrying the weight of everything he'd seen. The fluorescent lights of Whitaker Logistics buzzed overhead as Emily Rhodes hunched over her desk in the Human Resources Department. At 23, she was the newest hire, an intern with student loans that kept her awake at night, and ambition that kept her at the office long after everyone else had gone home. Tonight was no exception. The wall clock read 7:42 p.m. as she sorted through the day's rejected applications, a task no one else wanted. Just because they didn't make the cut doesn't mean they don't deserve closure, she muttered to herself, carefully drafting rejection emails that somehow managed to sound both professional and compassionate. The office was nearly empty, with only the occasional shadow passing by her glass-walled cubicle. She'd been at it for almost an hour when her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate. Dinner's getting cold. You coming home tonight or planning to marry your desk? Emily smiled, about to reply when the cleaning cart rattled past her door. Maria Dawes, clipboard tucked under her arm, nodded a silent greeting, as she did every night. Emily had always found it strange how the cleaning staff seemed invisible to most employees, but to her, they were as much a part of the company as anyone else. Good night, Maria, Emily called out, earning a surprised smile from the older woman. As Maria disappeared down the hallway, Emily gathered her things, deciding the remaining applications could wait until morning. She was halfway to the elevator when she remembered she'd left her reusable water bottle at the reception desk earlier. With a sigh, she retraced her steps through the dimly lit corridors. The reception area was deserted, the sleek couches and contemporary art installations bathed in the soft blue glow of emergency lights. Emily spotted her water bottle and was about to grab it when something caught her eye, a manila envelope wedged beneath the edge of the reception desk, as if it had fallen and been forgotten. Curious, she retrieved it, noting the dampness of one corner and a small tear along the edge. There was no name written on the outside, no indication of who it might belong to. Emily hesitated, knowing she should probably leave it for Kelly to deal with in the morning, but something compelled her to look inside. What she found made her sink into one of the plush waiting room chairs. The envelope contained a weathered resume, several medical reports with official-looking stamps, and beneath those a crumpled yellow form that seemed out of place among the other documents. The heading read, Form 17 Internal Requests, a document Emily recognized from her orientation as the company's system for employee special needs or accommodations. The form was dated 3 years ago, the paper soft from handling. In the special request to the director field, a neat, careful handwriting read, I would only like 5 minutes to tell why this company saved my son's life. If possible, please deliver this to Mr. Whitaker. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The name listed on the form was Claire Dawes, with an employee ID number in the maintenance department. Claire, not Maria, but the surname matched the woman who cleaned the office every night, the woman Emily had just greeted minutes ago. Why would she need to change her name? Emily whispered to herself, fingers tracing over the faded ink. The request was marked pending review, but the date stamp showed it was from 3 years ago. Around the same time, Thomas Whitaker had mysteriously disappeared from public life, leaving the company in the hands of the board of directors. Emily pulled out her phone, quickly searching for news about the company's founder. Article after article detailed his unexplained absence, the speculation ranging from health issues to financial fraud to a secret new venture. But nothing concrete, nothing definitive. Her mind flashed back to the strange man in the blue cap earlier that day, the one Craig Donovan had so callously dismissed. There had been something in his eyes, a quiet dignity that had seemed oddly familiar, though Emily couldn't place why at the time. It couldn't be, she murmured, the possibilities swirling in her mind. A soft noise startled her, and Emily quickly stuffed the papers back into the envelope. Down the hall, through the glass walls of the executive suite, she could see Craig Donovan at his computer, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. He was rewinding security footage, pausing on frames that showed the reception area from earlier that day. In each frozen image, the man in the blue cap was clearly visible. Craig's expression was one of growing panic as he picked up his phone, dialing frantically. Even from a distance, Emily could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He spoke rapidly into the phone, gesturing at his screen, his free hand running nervously through his perfectly styled hair. Emily ducked behind a column, clutching the envelope to her chest. Something was very wrong, and somehow she had stumbled right into the middle of it. Back in her apartment that night, Emily spread the contents of the envelope across her bedroom floor. The medical reports detailed treatments for a child with a rare congenital condition, multiple surgeries, specialized medications, physical therapy. The costs were astronomical, far beyond what a maintenance worker could afford, and yet each bill was stamped Covered by Whitaker Foundation, Special Directive. At the bottom of the envelope, Emily found one more item she'd missed before, a small photograph, its edges worn from handling. It showed a much younger Claire holding a tiny infant in a hospital bed, and next to her, a hand resting gently on her shoulder, a man's hand wearing a distinctive silver watch with a blue face. Emily had seen that exact watch in the company's lobby, in the portrait of Thomas Whitaker that hung above the reception desk. Her phone buzzed with an all-staff email that had just arrived, despite the late hour. Emergency board meeting, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Attendance mandatory. Special announcement regarding leadership. Emily carefully returned everything to the envelope, but kept the Form 17 separate, slipping it into her planner. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find Claire Dawes and learn the truth, whatever it might cost her. Across town, in a modest hotel room, Thomas Whitaker sat on the edge of the bed, blue cap in his hands, watching the rain streak down the window. On the TV, muted business news scrolled across the bottom of the screen, one headline flashing repeatedly. Breaking. Sources confirm Whitaker CEO alive, planning return to company. Well, he whispered to the empty room, that didn't take long. The Whitaker Logistics boardroom crackled with tension. 8 executives sat rigid in their leather chairs, smartphones silenced, but fingers twitching to check the news alerts that had been bombarding them since dawn. The mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, reflecting their strained expressions like a polished mirror. Outside, a media frenzy had erupted. Satellite vans clogged the street, reporters jockeying for position at the building entrance. The headline had spread like wildfire. Missing CEO returns. This has to be a hoax, muttered Vanessa Chen, head of marketing, scrolling through emails on her tablet. Thomas Whitaker has been gone for 3 years without a word. Why would he suddenly reappear dressed like a homeless man? To expose us, replied James Mercer, CFO, his jowls quivering as he dabbed sweat from his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. To test our loyalty. Craig Donovan sat silently at the far end, his normally impeccable appearance now showing signs of strain. His tie was slightly askew and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He had spent the entire night reviewing security footage, making frantic calls, and attempting to erase all digital evidence of yesterday's encounter, but it was too late. Somewhere, someone had leaked the story. "I've deleted the reception footage," he whispered to Richard Phelps, the head of security seated beside him. "Tell your team it was a technical glitch." Before Richard could respond, the boardroom doors swung open. The room fell silent. Thomas Whitaker stood in the doorway, transformed from yesterday's disheveled figure. Gone was the blue cap and worn clothing, replaced by a simple but immaculate charcoal suit. His beard was now neatly trimmed, his silver-streaked hair combed back. The only remnant of yesterday's disguise was a lingering weariness around his eyes. "Good morning," he said simply, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority that made every person in the room instinctively straighten their posture. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vanessa rose, her surprise giving way to genuine emotion. "Thomas," she said, we feared the worst." Thomas smiled faintly, stepping into the room with measured steps. "I'm sure you did. 3 years is a long disappearance." He remained standing, surveying faces that ranged from shocked to terrified. "Some of you I know well. Others," his gaze flickered briefly to Craig, "were hired during my absence." "Mr. Whitaker," said James, finding his voice at last, "the board should have been notified of your return. There are protocols, procedures. Are there protocols for when a CEO is denied entry to his own company?" Thomas asked mildly, producing a visitor badge from his pocket and placing it on the table. "When he's told to seek shelter elsewhere." Craig's face drained of color. The others turned to him in confusion. "I didn't recognize," Craig began, but Thomas raised a hand. "I'm not here for explanations or apologies," he said. "Not yet. I'm here because I need to understand what Whitaker Logistics has become in my absence." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "Effective immediately, I am resuming limited operational oversight as an observer. The board retains control of daily operations, but I will be granted full access to all departments and records." The legal document inside, already bearing the signatures of the majority shareholders, left no room for debate. Thomas Whitaker was back, not as CEO, but as something potentially more dangerous. A watchful eye with nothing to lose. As the executives processed this development, a soft knock came at the door. Emily Rhodes stood hesitantly at the threshold, clipboard clutched to her chest. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice barely audible. "HR sent me to take minutes of the emergency meeting." Thomas studied her for a moment, noting the intelligence behind her nervous exterior. "Perfect timing," he said. "Please come in, Miss Rhodes, sir." "Emily Rhodes. I'm an intern in human resources." "Well, Miss Rhodes, you've arrived at a historic moment. Please record that Thomas Whitaker has returned to Whitaker Logistics in an observational capacity." As Emily took her seat in the corner, carefully avoiding Craig's glare, Thomas continued addressing the board. "For the next 30 days, I will be operating under the name Thomas White. I'll be working primarily with mid-level managers and ground staff. No announcements, no press releases. As far as most employees are concerned, I'm simply a consultant brought in to assess company culture." "Is this some kind of test?" asked Richard Phelps, brows furrowed. Thomas's expression remained unreadable. "Call it an education. For all of us." The meeting continued for another hour, with Thomas outlining his limited role. As executives filed out, visibly shaken, he gestured for Emily to remain behind. When they were alone, he closed the boardroom door. "Miss Rhodes, I have a feeling you're more observant than most around here." Emily swallowed hard. "I try to pay attention, sir." Thomas's eyes softened slightly. "Then I'd like you to assist me during my evaluation period, starting with a thorough review of all employee files from the maintenance department, particularly those predating my departure." Emily's heart pounded. The Form 17 she'd discovered last night felt like it was burning a hole in her planner. "Any particular reason for starting there, Mr. Whitaker?" Thomas walked to the window, gazing down at the reporters still gathered below. 3 years ago I received a letter," he said quietly. "A letter that changed everything. But before I could respond properly, certain events forced me to leave. Now I need to know if it's too late to answer." He turned back to Emily, his expression suddenly vulnerable, revealing the weight of whatever burden he carried. "I believe someone in this building has been waiting a very long time to speak with me. Someone who may have lost hope that I ever received their message." Emily thought of the faded form, of Claire Dawes's careful handwriting, of the photograph with the hand wearing Thomas's distinctive watch. Something significant connected the company's founder to the quiet woman who mopped these floors every night. "I think I might know who you're looking for," she said softly. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise he'd shown since entering the building. "Her name is Claire Dawes," Emily continued, pulling the Form 17 from her planner. "And I believe she's been waiting to thank you for saving her son's life." Thomas took the yellowed paper with trembling hands, his composure finally cracking as he read the words he'd never had the chance to answer 3 years ago. For a brief moment, Emily caught a glimpse of the real Thomas Whitaker, not the powerful CEO or the disguised observer, but a man haunted by an unfinished conversation. "Where can I find her?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "She works the night shift," Emily replied, "but she has another name now. She goes by Maria." The digital alarm clock blinked 4:15 a.m. as Claire Dawes forced her eyes open in the pre-dawn darkness. Her small apartment in East Riverside, a neighborhood far removed from the gleaming downtown towers where she worked, was silent except for the soft hum of the heating unit struggling against the autumn chill. For a moment, she allowed herself the luxury of lingering beneath the worn quilt, her body still heavy with exhaustion from yesterday's shift, but only for a moment. With practiced efficiency, Claire slid her feet into the threadbare slippers beside her bed and padded to the bathroom, careful to avoid the creaking floorboard that might wake Matthew. The mirror reflected a woman who had aged beyond her 36 years, deep lines etched around her eyes, silver threads woven through her dark hair, shoulders permanently curved from years of bending, scrubbing, and lifting. She splashed cold water on her face, the shock jolting her fully awake. In the kitchen, she set water to boil on the ancient stove and prepared a thermos of tea that would sustain her through the morning hours. Her movements were automatic, refined by years of identical mornings. From the cabinet, she retrieved Matthew's medications, a rainbow of pills in varying shapes and sizes, and arranged them neatly beside his breakfast plate. Each one represented a small miracle, keeping her son alive despite the congenital condition that had threatened to take him from her since birth. Claire paused, fingertips brushing against the most expensive bottle. The label bore the logo of a pharmaceutical company that had only one distributor in the country, a distributor exclusively contracted with Whitaker Medical Systems, a subsidiary of Whitaker Logistics. The medication inside cost more per month than her rent, yet for 9 years, it had arrived without fail, fully covered by the company's Special Assistance Program, a program that, according to HR, didn't officially exist. She checked her watch, a simple digital timepiece with a cracked face, and realized she was running behind schedule. Quickly, she pulled on her uniform, gray polyester pants, a matching button-up shirt with maintenance staff embroidered above the pocket, and the name badge that read, Maria Dawes. The false name had been her protection, her shield against questions about her past, and the special treatment her son received. Before leaving, Claire crept to Matthew's bedroom door, easing it open just enough to see his sleeping form. At 9 years old, he was small for his age, his body battling daily against the disease that tried to claim him. Beside his bed sat the wheelchair he needed for longer distances, and on his nightstand, a framed photograph of them together in the hospital when he was born. Claire had carefully cropped the edge of the photo years ago, removing the hand that had rested on her shoulder, a hand connected to the man she now feared she might encounter again. "I'll be back before you wake up, my brave boy," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. The night before, rumors had spread through the cleaning staff about Thomas Whitaker's return. Claire had dropped an entire bucket of water when she overheard 2 security guards discussing it, earning a reprimand from her supervisor. The possibility that he might be in the building again, that she might cross paths with him after all these years, filled her with conflicting emotions she couldn't begin to untangle: fear, gratitude, shame, hope. The bus ride downtown was mercifully empty at this hour, allowing Claire to close her eyes and travel back to a time she rarely permitted herself to remember. 9 years ago, she had been a different person, a promising paralegal with a future ahead of her, engaged to Matthew's father. Then came the pregnancy complications, the devastating diagnosis, and the astronomical medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. Her fiancé had disappeared within weeks, unable to face a lifetime with a special needs child. Her savings had evaporated within months. It was during her darkest moment, sitting in a hospital chapel, contemplating unthinkable options, that she'd encountered Thomas Whitaker. Not knowing who he was, she'd poured out her story to this kind stranger in an expensive suit who had simply sat and listened. 2 days later, she'd received notification that all her son's medical expenses would be covered by the Whitaker Foundation. By the time she realized who her benefactor was, he had already arranged a maintenance position for her at his company, with flexible hours that accommodated Matthew's medical appointments. The only condition, complete confidentiality. The bus jolted to a stop in front of the Whitaker building, its gleaming glass facade looming against the still dark sky. Claire straightened her uniform, adjusted the name badge that declared her Maria, and steeled herself for whatever the day might bring. Inside, the early morning security guard nodded to her without really seeing her, a common experience for cleaning staff. She signed in using her alias, collected her supply cart from the maintenance closet, and began her usual routine on the executive floor. The hallways were deserted at this hour, allowing her to work unnoticed and undisturbed, just as she preferred. When she reached the executive bathroom, she paused. This was where the highest-ranking officers prepared for their day, washing away sleep from their eyes, straightening ties and smoothing skirts, rehearsing presentations in the mirror. Claire had learned more company secrets from cleaning these bathrooms than anyone would ever suspect. She pushed her cart through the door and began her methodical cleaning process. As she wiped down the counter, something caught her eye, a small object that had fallen behind the trash can. Retrieving it, she found herself holding a visitor badge. But it wasn't the plastic credential itself that made her heart seize in her chest. It was the name printed on it. T. Whitaker, visitor. Claire's hands began to tremble violently. He was here, in this building. After all these years, she slipped the badge into her pocket without thinking. Suddenly overwhelmed by emotions she had suppressed for nearly a decade, her eyes filled with tears that blurred her vision, making it impossible to continue working. Abandoning her cart, she stumbled into an empty conference room and collapsed into a chair, trying desperately to regain her composure. From her other pocket, she withdrew a worn plastic sleeve containing her most treasured possession, the original copy of Form 17 she had submitted years ago, folded together with the uncropped hospital photograph showing Thomas Whitaker's hand on her shoulder as she held her newborn son. The photo included a tiny bracelet on the baby's wrist, bearing the name that revealed everything, Matthew Whitaker Dawes. What no one at the company knew, what she had never revealed to anyone, was that 9 years ago in that hospital chapel, Thomas Whitaker had not just been a kind stranger. He had been the donor who provided the rare blood type that saved her baby during an emergency transfusion. The donor who, in that moment of crisis, had quietly acknowledged a truth neither of them had ever spoken aloud. Matthew was his son. Craig Donovan's Italian leather shoes clicked aggressively against the polished marble as he stormed through the West Wing corridor. The rhythmic sound matched his heartbeat, too fast, too hard, driven by a mixture of fury and panic that had been building since yesterday's boardroom revelation. Employees scattered before him like startled birds, his reputation for explosive anger preceding him through the hallways. "Where is she?" he demanded, bursting into the maintenance department's cramped office. The supervisor, a balding man named Jenkins, jumped at the sudden intrusion, nearly spilling coffee down his shirt. "Where is who, Mr. Donovan?" Jenkins stammered, scrambling to stand. "That cleaning woman, Maria's or Claire or whatever her name really is." Craig's voice was tight, controlled, but vibrating with barely contained rage. His perfectly manicured hand slammed a security report onto Jenkins's desk. She was seen entering a restricted file room at 5:30 this morning. The logs show her badge was used, but security cameras show no one leaving. Jenkins blinked rapidly, confusion evident on his face. "That's not possible. Claire, has been with us for years. Model employee. Never any problems." "Well, she has problems now." Craig leaned forward, invading the supervisor's personal space. "I want her in my office in 15 minutes, and I want her badge deactivated immediately." As Craig turned to leave, he caught sight of a young woman hovering in the doorway, Emily Rhodes, the intern who had been at Thomas Whitaker's side during the morning's board meeting. Her expression told him she'd heard everything. "Something I can help you with, Miss Rhodes?" he asked, his tone dangerously pleasant. Emily clutched her clipboard tighter. "Just delivering the revised cleaning schedule as requested." Craig's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Funny, I don't recall requesting anything from HR, especially not delivered by an intern." Before Emily could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced down at the text message. "Bring Claire to conference room 4B immediately. Don't let Donovan intercept her. Joe." Craig caught the momentary flash of panic on her face. "Give me your phone," he demanded, hand outstretched. "I can't do that, sir," Emily replied, voice steadier than she felt. "Company policy prohibits surrendering personal devices to anyone except security personnel." A muscle twitched in Craig's jaw. "Very well. Jenkins, find Maria Dawes and have her report to my office. Miss Rhodes, I suggest you focus on your actual duties, instead of playing messenger for our distinguished observer." With that parting shot, Craig strode out, already formulating his next move. He needed to contain this situation before it spiraled completely beyond his control. Too much was at stake. His position, his reputation, and secrets buried 3 years ago that needed to remain buried. Emily waited until Craig's footsteps faded before turning to Jenkins. "Do you know where Claire is now?" The supervisor frowned. "4th floor, East Wing bathrooms, according to the rotation. But if Donovan's looking for her, she's in trouble." "What's going on?" Emily was already heading for the door. "I'm not entirely sure, but I think someone very important wants to help her." 10 minutes later, Emily found Claire on her hands and knees in the executive washroom, scrubbing furiously at a porcelain sink. The older woman's movements were mechanical, her eyes distant, as if her mind were somewhere far away from the mundane task. "Claire," Emily said softly, closing the door behind her. "My name is Emily Rhodes. I need you to come with me right away." Claire looked up, startled, her hand still clutching the sponge. "I don't know any Claire. I'm Maria. I know who you really are," Emily replied gently. "And so does Thomas Whitaker." The sponge fell from Claire's hand, landing with a wet slap on the tiled floor. "I can't," she whispered, her face draining of color. "I'll lose everything. My job, Matthew's treatments. Mr. Whitaker isn't going to let that happen," Emily assured her, extending a hand to help her up. "But right now we need to move quickly. Craig Donovan is looking for you, and he's not happy." As if summoned by his name, the door swung open to reveal Craig, flanked by 2 security guards. His eyes gleamed with triumph as he surveyed the scene. "Well, well," he said smoothly. "Just the woman I've been looking for." He turned to the guards. "Escort Ms. Dawes to the security office. We've found our thief." "Thief?" Emily echoed, incredulous. "What are you talking about?" Craig produced a small envelope from his jacket pocket. $300 was reported missing from the finance department's petty cash drawer this morning. And look what we found in the supply closet nearest to Ms. Dawes' cleaning route. He opened the envelope to reveal several $20 bills. Money that mysteriously appeared after she accessed a restricted area with a badge that shouldn't have those privileges. Claire's face crumpled. "That's not true," she protested weakly, but the security guards were already moving toward her. "This is ridiculous," Emily interjected, stepping between Claire and the guards. "You're framing her because you're scared of what she knows." Craig's expression hardened. "Be careful, Miss Rhodes. Interns are easily replaced." "Are they?" came a quiet voice from the doorway. "I've always found good people rather irreplaceable." Thomas Whitaker stood in the entrance, his presence instantly changing the atmosphere in the room. He wore a simple grey suit with no tie, looking more like a professor than a corporate titan, but the authority in his bearing was unmistakable. "Mr. Whitaker," Craig began, his confident demeanor faltering slightly, "this is a routine security matter, nothing that requires your attention." Thomas stepped fully into the room, his gaze traveling from Craig to the guards, then settling on Claire, who had pressed herself against the wall as if wishing she could disappear into it. "Who authorized this?" Thomas asked, his voice low but carrying a steel edge that made everyone straighten. "She has more years of service to this company than you have of humanity, Mr. Donovan." The security guards exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure whose authority they should respect. Craig scrambled to maintain control. "We have evidence of theft, Mr. Whitaker, and unauthorized access to secure areas. As operations manager, it's my responsibility—" "Your responsibility," Thomas interrupted, "is to ensure this company operates with integrity, something I'm beginning to question in your case." He turned to the guards. "You're dismissed. This matter will be handled directly by me." As the guards retreated, Craig's face flushed with anger and humiliation. You can't just override established protocols because of some sentimental connection to a cleaning woman. Thomas stepped closer to Craig, his eyes cold. "I built this company from nothing, Mr. Donovan. Every protocol, every policy, every brick in this building exists because I put it there. Do not presume to lecture me on what I can and cannot do within these walls." The tension between the two men was palpable, crackling like static electricity in the confined space. Emily moved to Claire's side, offering silent support as the older woman trembled with emotion. "Claire," Thomas said, his voice softening as he turned away from Craig, "would you please come with me? There are matters we need to discuss, matters that have waited far too long." Before Claire could respond, Emily's phone buzzed again. She glanced down to see a message from a colleague in HR. "Found what you asked for. 2011 donation records. Check your email ASAP." As Claire hesitantly stepped forward to follow Thomas, Craig made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "This isn't over," he hissed, directing his words at Claire, but looking at Thomas. "Some secrets should stay buried." Thomas paused at the door, turning back with an expression of quiet certainty. "On that point, Mr. Donovan, we fundamentally disagree." Conference room 4B sat tucked away in a forgotten corner of the Whitaker building's 4th floor. Unlike the sleek, glass-walled meeting spaces that dominated the executive level, 4B retained the wood-paneled charm of the company's early days. Photographs of breaking ground ceremonies and ribbon cuttings lined the walls, silent witnesses to decades of corporate history. It was here, in this room untouched by modern renovations, that Thomas Whitaker chose to face a past he could no longer avoid. The afternoon light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the oval table where Thomas sat waiting. His fingers traced absent patterns on the polished wood, the same table where, 12 years earlier, he had signed the papers establishing the Whitaker Foundation, the same table where, 9 years ago, he had authorized the special medical fund that would save a child he had never acknowledged as his own. The door opened quietly, and Emily ushered Claire inside before discreetly withdrawing. The two remaining occupants of the room regarded each other in silence, separated by 10 feet of mahogany and 9 years of unspoken truths. Claire stood with her hands clasped tightly before her, still dressed in her maintenance uniform. The name badge reading Maria glinted under the recessed lighting, a small betrayal of her carefully constructed identity. "Please sit," Thomas finally said, his voice gentle but strained. Claire moved mechanically to the chair farthest from him, perching on its edge as if preparing for a quick escape. Her eyes remained fixed on her worn hands, hands that had scrubbed and cleaned and cared and sacrificed, hands that now trembled slightly despite her efforts to appear composed. "I received your Form 17, Thomas began, placing the yellowed paper between them. "Not when you sent it, I was already gone by then, but yesterday. Miss Rhodes found it." Claire's gaze remained downcast. "I shouldn't have sent it. It was a mistake to thank me," Thomas finished for her. "For helping your son?" He paused, the unspoken word hanging in the air between them. "Our son." "I don't know the CEO of Whitaker Logistics," Claire said firmly, finally raising her eyes to meet his. "I'm just a cleaning woman who wrote a letter years ago out of desperation. That's all." Thomas studied her face, the premature lines around her eyes, the silver strands woven through her dark hair, the rigid set of her jaw that spoke of years of hardship and determination. She had aged in ways that broke his heart, knowing he might have prevented it. "Claire," he said softly, "we both know that's not true." Reaching into his jacket pocket, he withdrew something small and silver, a tiny charm in the shape of a sailboat tarnished with age. He placed it on the table and slid it toward her. "This was in the envelope with your application. It fell out when Craig tore your papers." Claire's composure fractured at the sight of it. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp as tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. "Matthew's hospital bracelet charm," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost it forever." The small silver sailboat had been attached to the identification bracelet placed on her newborn son's wrist, a special edition from the nurses who had witnessed the miracle of his survival against impossible odds. Claire had kept it as a talisman, a reminder of the day her child had been saved by a transfusion from the only compatible donor they could find in time. "You knew," she said, her voice barely audible. "All this time you knew." Thomas's expression softened, years of carefully maintained distance crumbling in an instant. "Not at first. When I met you in that hospital chapel, you were just a desperate mother praying for a miracle. When they said your baby needed a rare blood type, my blood type, I didn't hesitate." He paused, the memory washing over him like a physical sensation. "It was only afterward, when the doctor mentioned the dates, that I realized the timing aligned with the mistake we both made," Claire finished for him. Her voice held no bitterness, only a worn acceptance. "One night after the company holiday party, we were both vulnerable. You'd just lost your wife. I'd just been passed over for the paralegal promotion I'd worked years for." Thomas nodded, his own memories of that night resurfacing, the shared comfort between two wounded souls, the brief connection that had meant nothing and everything at once. "I never knew you were pregnant," he said quietly. "By the time I put it together, you had already disappeared from the legal department. Then I found you again in that hospital, your son fighting for his life." Claire's fingers closed around the silver sailboat charm. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I knew it would create a scandal. You were grieving, rebuilding your life. The company was your legacy. I couldn't destroy that. So you disappeared," Thomas said. "Changed departments. Used your mother's maiden name. I never expected anything from you," Claire continued, her voice strengthening. "But when Matthew was born with his condition, when the doctors said he needed treatments no insurance would cover, I had nowhere else to turn." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes intent. "You never asked me directly for help. Even when I arranged the foundation support, the job in maintenance, the special medical fund, you never once claimed what was rightfully yours." "What was rightfully Matthew's?" Claire corrected him. "All I ever wanted was for him to have a chance at life." A heavy silence fell between them, 9 years of separation condensed into the space of heartbeats. Outside the conference room, the company continued its bustling rhythm, oblivious to the private reckoning taking place behind the closed door of room 4B. "Did you ever?" Thomas hesitated, vulnerability evident in the slight tremor of his voice. "Did you ever tell him about me?" Claire shook her head slowly. "How could I? He was just a child. And you were Thomas Whitaker, the name on the building, the face in the newspapers. I told him his father was someone who had to go away, but who made sure he would always be taken care of." Thomas's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And now? He's 9 now, isn't he?" "Yes," Claire replied softly. "Smart. Brave. Despite everything his body puts him through, he never complains. He has your eyes, you know, and your mind always questioning, always figuring things out." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Emily entered, her expression apologetic but urgent. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I found something you both need to see." She placed a folder on the table, opening it to reveal a set of documents with the Whitaker Foundation letterhead. "This is from the 2011 Special Allocation Records. A private donation request was submitted by Claire Dawes for a child needing experimental treatment for Treacher-Collins syndrome." Emily pointed to the signature at the bottom, Thomas Whitaker's bold scrawl approving not just the standard coverage, but unlimited medical support for the duration of the child's lifetime. "The child's name on the application," Emily continued, her voice gentle, "is Matthew Whitaker Dawes." Claire's eyes widened in shock. I never put his middle name on any official documents. I was too afraid." "You didn't," Thomas confirmed quietly. "I added it myself when I approved the request. It was the only acknowledgement I could make at the time, without exposing you to scrutiny or putting my own complicated life on display." The revelation hung in the air between them, a bridge spanning 9 years of silence. "Craig has been trying to access these records since your return was announced," Emily added. "He's been systematically erasing security footage, including your confrontation at reception. I think he's afraid of what might come out if you two reconnect." Thomas's expression hardened. "Craig's time at this company is coming to an end, but that's tomorrow's problem." He turned back to Claire, his gaze softening once more. "Today, there's something more important we need to discuss." He rose from his chair and moved to the window, looking out at the city spread below, the empire he had built, the legacy he had protected at the cost of knowing his own son. "I'd like to meet him, Claire," he said simply, "if you'll allow it." The company cafeteria had never been so quiet. At 9 a.m. sharp, Over 300 employees from every department filled the expansive space, abandoning their morning routines at the unprecedented all-staff meeting called by Human Resources. The usual clatter of cutlery, hum of conversation and aroma of coffee had been replaced by a charged silence and the subtle scent of anticipation. Workers sat shoulder to shoulder at the long tables, executives in tailored suits uncomfortably wedged between maintenance staff in grey uniforms, IT specialists sharing benches with loading dock personnel. The artificial divisions of corporate hierarchy temporarily dissolved in the face of collective curiosity. Near the back wall, Craig Donovan paced in small, tight circles, periodically checking his watch and shooting venomous glances at the makeshift stage area where a podium had been hastily erected. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night spent attempting to sanitize security footage and access records. His normally impeccable appearance had slipped, his tie slightly askew, a coffee stain marring his French cuffs, his polished veneer cracking under pressure. "This is completely inappropriate," he muttered to Richard Phelps, the head of security who stood nearby looking equally uncomfortable. Corporate announcements should follow proper channels: board approval, press releases, controlled messaging. Richard merely nodded, his attention fixed on the side entrance where Emily Rhodes had just appeared, clipboard in hand, speaking in hushed tones to someone just out of sight. A projector hummed to life overhead, its blank blue screen illuminating the expectant faces below. The low murmur of speculation that had been building suddenly died as Thomas Whitaker stepped onto the small platform. Gone was the simple grey suit of yesterday, replaced by attire that sent a ripple of shock through the room: jeans, a button-down shirt, and the faded blue cap he had worn during his initial rejection at reception. The employees who had been with the company long enough to recognize their founder sat up straighter, expressions ranging from confusion to dawning comprehension. Newer hires leaned toward their colleagues, whispering urgent questions about the stranger commanding their attention. Thomas approached the microphone with measured steps, his presence filling the room despite his deliberately understated appearance. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner without effort, the natural authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "Good morning," he began simply. "For those who don't know me, my name is Thomas Whitaker. I founded this company 30 years ago in a warehouse across town with 6 employees and a dream of building something that would outlast me." He paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. Some familiar, many not. 3 days ago, I returned to the company I built after a 3-year absence, but I didn't come through the executive entrance with an entourage. I came through the front door, dressed like this, with an application in my hand. Another figure emerged from the side entrance. Claire Dawes, no longer in her maintenance uniform, but dressed in a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, instead of hidden beneath the utilitarian scarf she typically wore. The transformation was striking. Without the institutional clothing that had rendered her invisible, she stood with quiet dignity, her natural beauty no longer obscured by her role. Behind her, Emily guided a third person forward, a boy in a wheelchair, small for his age but with an alert, intelligent expression that surveyed the room with undisguised curiosity. Matthew Dawes wore a crisp button-down shirt and khaki pants that Claire had clearly set aside for special occasions. His condition was evident in the specialized wheelchair and the subtle medical equipment attached to it, but what caught the attention of every person in that room was his eyes, the exact same shade and shape as the man standing at the podium. A collective intake of breath swept through the cafeteria as connections were made, questions formed, and assumptions crumbled. "Before I explain why I've brought you all here, I'd like to show you something," Thomas continued, nodding to Emily, who typed a command into the laptop connected to the projector. The screen above him flickered to life, displaying security footage from the reception area 3 days earlier. In crisp, unmistakable detail, the video showed Thomas in his disguise approaching the front desk, being intercepted by Craig, and ultimately being humiliated and dismissed from his own company. The audio was clear enough that Craig's contemptuous words echoed through the cafeteria. "This isn't the place for you. The social services office is 2 blocks down. They might be able to help you there." As the footage played, Craig's face drained of color. He took an involuntary step backward, bumping into a table and causing several employees to turn and stare. Their expressions had transformed from confusion to something harder: judgment, disappointment, anger on behalf of the man they now realized was their founder. When the video ended, Thomas let the silence linger, allowing the impact to settle across the room. Then he gestured for Claire and Matthew to join him on the platform. "I could stand here and tell you about corporate values, about how we treat people, about dignity and respect being more than words in a mission statement," Thomas said, his voice taking on a deeper resonance. "But the truth is, what happened to me at that reception desk isn't the real story we need to address today." He placed a gentle hand on Matthew's shoulder, the gesture natural and protective. "The real failure runs deeper than one man's rudeness to a stranger. The real failure is how we've allowed ourselves to become blind to the people who make this company function every day." Thomas turned to Emily, who stepped forward with the yellowed Form 17 in her hands. Her voice was clear and steady as she read aloud. "Gostaria apenas de agradecer. Não quero aumento, nem cargo. Apenas que meu filho dia soubesse que homens de terno também têm coração." She paused, then translated for those who didn't understand the Portuguese. "I only wish to thank you. I don't want a raise or a promotion. I just want my son to know someday that men in suits have hearts too." Tears glistened in the eyes of many workers as Emily continued reading the simple, heartfelt plea Claire had written years ago, a request not for herself, but for a moment of acknowledgement for her child. "This form," Thomas explained, "was submitted by Claire Dawes 9 years ago. It was never delivered to me because I had already begun my absence from the company. It was found by Miss Rhodes just 2 days ago, buried under a mountain of bureaucracy and indifference." He looked down at Matthew, whose bright eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that suggested the boy was putting together pieces of a puzzle long left unsolved. "Claire has worked in our maintenance department for 9 years, Thomas continued. "She has cleaned our offices, sanitized our bathrooms, emptied our trash, all while remaining virtually invisible to most of us. During that same time, her son Matthew has battled a rare medical condition requiring specialized care that most insurance won't cover." Thomas's voice faltered slightly, raw emotion breaking through his composed exterior. "What very few people know is that this company has been providing that care through a special directive of the Whitaker Foundation. What even fewer know is why." Claire stepped forward then, her hand finding Thomas's in a gesture that sent another shockwave through the assembled employees. "I met Mr. Whitaker many years ago," she said, her voice soft but carrying surprising strength. "When Matthew was born with his condition, when doctors said he wouldn't survive without treatments we couldn't afford, Mr. Whitaker created a program that saved my son's life. He gave me employment when no one else would accommodate the schedule of a single mother with a special needs child." She turned to face the crowd, her expression resolute. "For 9 years, I've cleaned these floors in silence, grateful for the chance to give my son a life. I never asked for recognition. I never asked for anything more than what we were already given." Thomas gently squeezed her hand before addressing the room once more. "The measure of any organization isn't how it treats its most powerful members, but how it regards those with the least visibility. We've failed that measure, and it's time for change." As he spoke these final words, his gaze settled directly on Craig, who stood frozen in place, the weight of 300 condemning stares pressing upon him from all sides. The message was clear to everyone present. A reckoning had come to Whitaker Logistics, and nothing would ever be the same again. 6 weeks had transformed Whitaker Logistics. The spring sunshine streamed through newly installed windows in what had once been a dreary break room for maintenance staff, now converted into a bright community space where employees from all departments gathered during lunch hours. The rigid hierarchies that had once defined the company's culture were slowly dissolving, replaced by collaborative teams that spanned traditional corporate divisions. In his temporary office on the 15th floor, Thomas Whitaker signed the final document in a thick stack of legal papers. The engraved pen, a gift from Claire on his 56th birthday last week, glided smoothly across the signature line. With that single flourish, his 3-decade journey with the company officially entered its final chapter. "So it's done," said James Mercer, the CFO, accepting the folder with a mixture of respect and sadness. "Whitaker Logistics will transition to employee ownership by the end of the quarter." Thomas leaned back in his chair, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "The board has approved all provisions, including the Formulario 17 fund?" James nodded. "It was unanimous. 20% of annual profits will be directed to the medical assistance program for employees' children with rare conditions. The legal language specifically names it the Formulario 17 Fund, as you requested. And the scholarship program for Emily? Also approved. She'll have her full MBA covered at any institution she chooses, plus a director-track position waiting when she graduates. James hesitated. There's just one matter remaining, the Donovan situation. Thomas's expression hardened slightly at the mention of Craig's name. The former operations manager had been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into his behavior and business practices. The evidence compiled against him was substantial, not just his treatment of Thomas in disguise, but a pattern of abusive management and questionable decisions that had damaged the company's culture over several years. "Is he here?" Thomas asked. "Waiting in conference room 4B as you requested," James confirmed, "though I still don't understand why you wanted this meeting to happen there specifically." Thomas rose from his desk and straightened his tie. No longer the simple attire of his undercover days, but not the imposing power suits of his earlier career either. He had found a middle ground that reflected his evolved perspective. "Some conversations need the right context," he replied simply. "Will you make sure everything is ready for the general announcement at 2 o'clock? As James departed, Thomas paused at his office window, gazing out at the city skyline he had helped reshape over 30 years of business leadership. His reflection in the glass showed a man changed by recent events, the lines around his eyes now evidence of smiles rather than stress, his posture unburdened by the weight of secrets. The journey to conference room 4B took him past cubicles and offices, where employees greeted him with genuine warmth rather than the fearful deference of the past. On the wall near the elevator, a newly installed digital board displayed photographs of staff members celebrating birthdays, work anniversaries, and personal milestones, part of the company's renewed commitment to recognizing the humans behind the organizational chart. Claire had been promoted to Community Relations Director, a position created specifically to bridge gaps between management and staff. Her natural empathy and intimate knowledge of the company's blind spots made her uniquely qualified for the role. The transformation in her went beyond title and salary. She carried herself with newfound confidence, her intelligence and compassion finally given the platform they deserved. And Matthew, the son Thomas was slowly getting to know through weekend visits and Thursday dinner rituals, was thriving under expanded medical care and the simple joy of finally understanding his own story. His condition would always require management, but the latest treatments were yielding promising results. When Thomas reached room 4B, he paused outside the door, gathering his thoughts. Craig Donovan sat alone inside, his once immaculate appearance now slightly disheveled, his arrogance diminished by 6 weeks of professional exile and public scrutiny. Thomas entered quietly, closing the door behind him. Craig rose immediately, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face: defensiveness, shame, and a desperate desire for redemption. "Mr. Whitaker," he began, voice strained, "I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you before the board's final decision. I've prepared a complete explanation for my actions and a proposal for how I might make amends." Thomas raised a hand, silencing the rehearsed speech. "I didn't come here for explanations, Craig. I came to understand something more fundamental." He took a seat across from the man who had once epitomized everything wrong with Whitaker Logistics culture. "Tell me, when did it happen? When did you begin seeing people as obstacles or tools rather than human beings?" The unexpected question seemed to catch Craig off guard. He blinked rapidly, his carefully constructed defense crumbling. I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Thomas replied softly. "I've reviewed your personnel file. 9 years ago you were different, promising, ambitious, but also known for mentoring junior staff. Something changed. I want to know what." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Craig's shoulders slumped, his facade cracking. 8 years ago," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I was passed over for promotion despite exceeding every performance metric. The position went to someone with family connections to a board member." His eyes, when he raised them to meet Thomas's, held a vulnerability that had been buried beneath years of bitterness. "I decided then that merit wasn't enough. That the only way to succeed was to play the power game better than everyone else." Thomas nodded slowly. "And how has that philosophy served you?" Craig gestured helplessly at the empty room, at his current predicament. "I'm about to lose everything I've worked for. My reputation is destroyed." "The man you've become doesn't frighten me, Craig," Thomas said, echoing words from the brief outline he had reviewed with Emily when planning the company's restructuring. "He saddens me. You have the chance to change, but first you need to ask forgiveness, not from me, but from those you've truly wronged." Craig's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. "You mean Claire? And every employee you've belittled, every person you've made feel invisible," Thomas confirmed, "starting today." As if on cue, the door opened to reveal Claire standing there, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to Craig's diminished state. Behind her, the corridor had filled with employees from every department: maintenance workers, receptionists, junior analysts, all those who had suffered under Craig's management style. Craig stared at the assembled faces, recognition and regret washing over him in visible waves. Slowly he rose from his chair, straightened his shoulders, and did something no one present had ever witnessed before. He knelt. "I have failed you," he said, his voice breaking. "All of you. Not just as a manager, but as a human being. I can't undo the hurt I've caused, but I ask for the chance to become someone better, someone worthy of working alongside you." The silence that followed was profound, charged with collective emotion. Then Claire stepped forward, extending her hand to the kneeling man. "Getting up is always harder than staying down," she said softly, "but it's the only way forward." Later that afternoon, Thomas stood before the entire company once more, this time in the main atrium where natural light streamed through soaring windows. Claire stood beside him, and in the front row, Matthew watched from his wheelchair, a tablet computer on his lap where he was coding a simple game, a new therapy that combined his medical exercises with his budding interest in technology. "Today marks my official retirement as CEO of Whitaker Logistics," Thomas announced. "But it also marks the beginning of something more important, a company that values every contribution, that sees the humanity in each role, that operates with the understanding that our greatest asset will always be the people who make up our community." He unveiled the new corporate charter with its cornerstone provision, the Formulario 17 Fund, permanently allocating resources to care for the most vulnerable families within the company. Emily Rhodes received a standing ovation when her scholarship and future directorship were announced. Craig Donovan, standing quietly at the back, witnessed a model of leadership based on service rather than power. And throughout the building, the invisible barriers that had separated departments and ranks began to dissolve in the warmth of shared purpose. That evening, Thomas sat alone in his home office, a leather-bound journal open before him. His pen moved steadily across the blank page as he composed his final thoughts for the letter that would accompany his will, a document that would only be read after he was gone. "The dignity of a person," he wrote, "is never found in the clothes they wear or the title they hold. It lives in the hands that lift others when everyone else has turned away. It survives in the courage to acknowledge our mistakes and the wisdom to repair them while we still have time." He paused, looking at the framed photograph newly installed on his desk, himself, Claire, and Matthew during their first official outing as a family. The silver sailboat charm from Matthew's hospital bracelet had been incorporated into the frame's design, a small but significant reminder of beginnings born from endings, of hope emerging from despair. With quiet certainty, Thomas Whitaker closed his journal, knowing that his greatest legacy would not be the company that bore his name, but the lives transformed by the simple act of seeing those who had once been invisible. In the quiet moments when we're alone with our reflections, we're faced with the truest measure of who we've become. Thomas Whitaker discovered that his greatest legacy wasn't the company bearing his name, but the lives he touched when no one was watching. Would you have the courage to walk through your own front door disguised as someone powerless, just to see who you've really been all along? Sometimes the most profound connections in our lives remain unspoken for years, buried beneath layers of pride, fear, or misguided protection. Claire chose silence to protect her child, while Thomas chose absence to protect his company. Yet in the end, it was honesty that healed them both. What truths might you be hiding that, if spoken, could bridge impossible divides and bring healing to those you care about? The clothes we wear, the titles we hold, the appearances we maintain, these are merely costumes in life's complex theater. The true measure of our character lives in how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return, in the dignity we afford to every person, regardless of their perceived value. Remember, the hands that lift others when everyone else turns away are the ones that truly change the world. If you were moved by this story, Please follow our channel for more life-changing narratives, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own invisible worth today.